The rain came down over the city like static on a bad wire, hissing against the office glass while the clock crawled toward midnight. May 24, 2026. The kind of night when routers blink in closets, servers hum in dark rooms, and trouble slips through a web panel wearing somebody else's coat. Three armed robberies in the same Tenda neighborhood, all carrying the same weapon, operating system command. Then a quieter break-in from the software supply alley, a developer tool with a poisoned path. None of them were repeat offenders caught in the act on the KEV board, not yet. But public exploit code changes the weather. It turns drizzle into flood. The first case was CVE-2026-7096W, a high-severity armed robbery with a CVSS score of 8.8. The product was Tenda HG3 firmware, specifically Tenda HG320. My informant's tip, the EPSS probability sat at W1%. Low odds on paper, sure. But paper burns fast when an exploit is public. The broken lock sits in the boaform formTracer endpoint inside the formTracer function. The weakness is CVE-78, improper neutralization of special elements used in an operating system command, better known as OS command injection. The attacker sends a crafted HTTP request to boaform formTracer and manipulates the data size parameter. The web management component accepts that value, passes it into a shell command used for traceroute behavior, and fails to properly validate or escape it. If the attacker inserts shell metacharacters, the device may treat part of the parameter not as data but as a command. Step 1. Send the poisoned request. Step 2. The BOA web interface hands the argument to the traceroute handler. Step 3. The shell executes attacker-controlled content with the privilege of the router process. The affected range named in the report is Tenda HG3 2.0. These home and small office routers often sit at the edge of a network where the rain hits first. They may not have enterprise market share numbers that make headlines, but consumer routers are deployed in large, quiet fleets. An attacker who succeeds may gain command execution on the device. From there, the playbook gets ugly. Change DNS settings, install a botnet payload, pivot into the local network, sniff traffic, build a foothold for later ransomware activity. Exploitation is remote if the management interface is reachable. If the web panel is exposed to the internet, no user needs to click a thing. If access is limited to the LAN, the attacker needs a local foothold or a victim network path. Remediation is colder than I like it. As of this report, no exact patched Tenda HG3 firmware version is identified for CVE-2026-7160. Sysadmins, network teams, and anyone managing small office gear should check Tenda support channels for firmware newer than HG320 and apply the vendor update when available. Until then, disable remote administration from the WAN. Restrict the management interface to a trusted admin subnet. Place the device behind a firewall rule that blocks access to boaform formTracer from untrusted hosts. Detection teams should look for HTTP requests containing aboform formTracer with suspicious data size values, especially semicolons, backticks, pipe characters, dollar parenthesis syntax, wget, curl, busybox, shesh, or nc. Watch for unexpected outbound traffic from the router to unknown hosts. But that wasn't the only body on the slab tonight. The next file was CVE-2026-7019, another high-severity armed robbery in Tenda HG3 firmware, CVSS 828, EPSS-W, no KEV listing, which means it has not been cataloged as a repeat offender caught in the act by CISA. Still, the exploit is public, and a public exploit is a loaded revolver left on a diner counter. This crime scene is epiform formCountrystr. The affected function is not fully named in the advisory, but the weapon is clear. The CountrystR parameter can be manipulated to produce OS command injection, again mapping to CVE-78. The attacker sends a remote HTTP request to boaform formCountrystr with a crafted CountrystR argument. The firmware component responsible for setting or handling country and region configuration processes that value incorrectly. Instead of treating CountrystR as a plain configuration value, it lets shell syntax bleed into a command context. The device shell then executes injected content. That is the whole racket. A web form becomes a command line, and the attacker gets to type. The affected version is Tenda HG3 The risk is sharper because routers are infrastructure, not just gadgets. They route traffic, enforce network boundaries, and often run with weak monitoring. Successful exploitation can provide command execution on the router. The attacker can alter region settings as cover, deploy malware, change routing, modify DNS, proxy traffic, or use the device as a stepping stone into cameras, printers, laptops, and file shares. Exploitation is remote where the management interface is reachable. Authentication requirements are not clearly stated in the report, so defenders should assume exposure is dangerous and verify whether their deployment permits unauthenticated or weakly authenticated access. For remediation, there is no exact patched version listed in the provided intelligence for CVE 2026-7119. Upgrade from Tenda HG3 to a vendor-released corrected firmware if Tenda publishes one. If no patched firmware is available, network teams should remove the device from exposed roles or replace it with supported hardware. Disable WAN side management. Require strong admin credentials. Limit access to the web interface by source IP. Use firewall policy to block formCountrystr from untrusted networks. Security teams should hunt for requests to that path containing command separators, encoded shell syntax, or payload download strings. On the network side, investigate sudden outbound connections from the router to unfamiliar IP addresses, especially over HTTP, TFTP, or raw TCP. I barely had time to light another cigarette when the next file landed on my desk. EPSS DO 1%. Tenda HG3 firmware again, this time identified as Tenda HG3 2.0 3000-3070. No KEV, entry, not a repeat offender caught in the act, at least not on the official wall. But the exploit has been disclosed, and the night was getting crowded. Here, the vulnerable endpoint is boaform admin formCountrystr in the formGPON-conf-func, in the formGPON-conf-func, in the formGPON-conf-floyd. The flaw is OS command injection, CVE-78. The attacker sends a crafted request to the GPON configuration endpoint, placing shell control characters or command fragments inside FMGPONloid. The admin web component processes that value as part of a lower-level configuration operation. If the value is concatenated into an operating system command without strict validation and safe execution handling, the shell interprets attacker content. The result is command execution on the router. The important detail is the path includes admin, which may imply an administrative surface, but defenders should not relax. Exposed admin panels and stolen router credentials are common currency in this town. The affected version is Tenda HG3 2.0 3000-300307. GPON configuration touches broadband access behavior, which makes the endpoint especially sensitive. An attacker with the needed reach may gain the ability to run commands, tamper with network configuration, load persistence, or interfere with connectivity. In a real-world attack, this can become botnet enrollment, credential theft by traffic redirection, or a staging point for lateral movement into a home office or small business. Exploitation is remote. Authentication requirements are not confirmed in the advisory text, so treat any reachable management service as high risk. If internet-facing, the device is standing under a street lamp with a target painted on its back. Remediation again depends on vendor action. No exact patched firmware version is provided for CVE 2026-7096. Administrators should check for a Tenda firmware release newer than HG3 3000 3000-3003-7070-7070 and upgrade if available. Workarounds are practical and urgent. Block WAN access to the management plane. Restrict boaform admin formGPON-conf to trusted admin hosts only. Put the router management interface on an isolated VLAN where ordinary user devices cannot reach it. DevOps and security teams managing distributed offices should inventory Tenda HG3 units and confirm exposure. Detection should focus on HTTP requests to boaform admin formGPON-conf with abnormal FMGPONloid content, URL encoded metacharacters, or command strings invoking shell tools. Also, The night was far from over. The fourth case was different. CVE-2026-7660, a medium severity break-in with a CVSS score of 6.3 and an EPSS probability of 0.01%. The product was Skill9 website downloader up to version 0.0 affecting the MCP interface component in 0.0do, affecting the MCP interface component in 0.0tsds. No KEV listing, no repeat offender caught in the act, but the alley it lived in mattered because developer tools often sit close to secrets. The technical break is another OS command injection, CVE-78, this time in the download website. The attacker manipulates the output path argument. In a typical attack chain, a remote client or connected MCP caller submits a request telling the tool to download a website and write output to a chosen path. The MCP interface passes output path into download website. If the function builds a shell command using that path without strict validation, escaping, or safer process invocation, the attacker can include shell metacharacters. The host then runs unintended commands. It is the same old con in a different suit. A file path stops being a file path and starts acting like a loaded command. The affected versions are Skill9 website downloader up to and including Boint 1.0. This is not a household name platform with a giant installed base, but its context makes it dangerous. MCP-connected utilities may be wired into developer workstations, automation runners, AI agent workflows, or internal tooling. If exploited, an attacker may gain command execution in the environment running the tool. That could mean access to source code, API tokens, SSH keys, cloud credentials, build artifacts, or internal network paths. Exploitation may be remote if the MCP interface is exposed or reachable by an untrusted caller. It may require the attacker to reach the tool's interface, but it does not necessarily require a human click once that access exists. The remediation is to upgrade to a version later than Boint 1.0 if the maintainer has released a corrected build. If no patched version is available, remove or disable the tool until it is corrected. Developers should change command execution code to avoid shell interpolation. Use safe APIs such as spawn or exec file with argument arrays, canonicalize output paths, restrict writes to an approved base directory, and reject metacharacters and path traversal. DevOps teams should ensure MCP tools are not exposed to the open internet and are reachable only by trusted local processes or authenticated internet and are reachable only by trusted local processes. Detection teams should review MCP request logs for unusual output path values containing semicolons, pipes, backticks, $parenthesis syntax, encoded control characters, or commands like curl, www, bash, shesh, python, or PowerShell. On developer hosts, look for unexpected child processes spawned by node. 4 cases. Same rain, same weapon, mostly. Command injection is an old racket because it still pays. The attacker looks for a place where user input gets stitched into a shell command, then slides a blade between the stitches. Routers, admin panels, developer tools, it does not matter. If input can become instruction, the city has a problem. So here's the takeaway before the dawn starts lying to us. Inventory Tenda HG3 devices and Skill9 website downloader deployments. Remove management panels from the public internet. Patch where a corrected version exists. Replace unsupported edge gear. Put strict allow lists around admin access. Hunt your logs for poison parameters and strange outbound calls. And for the builders out there, stop handing raw user input to a shell. This is Jack Cipher, signing off from the wet side of the firewall. Keep your ports closed, your logs warm, and never trust a parameter with a smile too clean.